Okay, my next guest is out and about on the road, touring all over the place. He's coming to Belfast. He plays the Accidental Theatre on the 15th of July. And right now we can go live to New York and speak to the legendary Dean Friedman. Dean, how are you?
I'm very well, Robin. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. So you're looking forward to coming back to Belfast again?
I am indeed, absolutely. I always enjoy my visits over there, even though it's a little bit of a schlep. It's worth it for what's always an enthusiastic, appreciative audience.
Now, you've kept busy over the whole pandemic period. You released the album American Lullaby, which we love. We've been playing it here on the radio. But this was kind of a different thing for you because you did this as a kind of a Kickstarter crowdfunding project, didn't you?
Just through my own website. I've been crowdfunding my albums since 2001 when I did the Treehouse Journals. In fact, I may be one of the earliest indie artists to have done so. The band Marillion did it a few months before me. They crowdfunded a U.S. tour. But I was in my treehouse that same year. I had a lot of songs. I wanted to go in the studio, but I needed some money to upgrade and pay musicians. And so I sent an email to the folks on my email list saying just that. If they ordered the album in advance, I'd go in the studio and I'd deliver it. And I was a little nervous that everyone would say, "Oh, Dean, why don't you get a proper job?" And some people said just that, but enough people supported the idea that I was able to produce what was then the Treehouse Journals. And I've been crowdfunding my albums and my tours ever since. And I'm grateful to my enthusiastic listening audience for allowing me to do just that.
And the latest album, American Lullaby, that's been very well received, hasn't it?
I'm really proud of it. It was my personal take on all the crazy stuff that's happened to everybody around the world these last few years. So the album touches on all these crises that we've been dealing with, our polarized politics and what used to be called the pending or looming climate crisis, which is now no longer looming or pending. It's right here and now. Of course, the pandemic and the lockdown. But as is the case with all my albums and my habit, it's mixed with a healthy dose of sort of whimsy and humor, which to me is a key survival mechanism for dealing with all the crazy stuff that we got to deal with.
And is it good to be in control of everything that you do these days without having that big record machine behind you?
Absolutely. I love that independence. I really cherish it. The only downside is that when I used to do studio albums for a label, there was always some A&R guy sort of leaning over my shoulder, figuring out what I was trying to do, making judgments and wondering. And now, because I crowdfund my albums, I feel like there are 1,000 people leaning over my shoulder, wondering what I'm up to. And but so far, they've been pleased with the results. I'm
going to take you back to the year 1977, which, of course, was a very good year for you, all thanks to a song that you're never going to get away from. The song we're talking about is Lucky Stars.
You know what? I'm proud of that song, and even though it gets teased in some quarters, when I wrote it, I was listening to a lot of country music on the radio. And in those days, there were really not a lot of pop duets. But there has always been a long tradition of duets in country music. So in some ways, Lucky Stars was kind of my pop version of a country duet, filled with all the angst of country music, the squabbling and the jealousy and finally the kissing and making up. And because it tells a story that I think is familiar to almost every couple. And I think that's why people embraced it the way they did and relate to it as they do.
And was Lisa a real person?
No, that's not the question, Robin. The question is, did we really just have lunch?
Now, what about the female vocal on the track as well, Denise Marza? Because there's always been a kind of mystery around her, hasn't there?
Well, that's not my fault. It was owing down to the idiocy of my ridiculous record label. They didn't even want that record on the album. They said, Dean, you're a solo artist. What do you want to duet for? And I had to argue with them. I said, look, it's a nice song. People are going to like it. And they relented. Um, and but indicative of their dismissal and their attitude towards the record, they left Denise's name off of the single. She was always on the album, and she did become known as the Mystery Lady. And it's a real shame because she's got one of the greatest voices in pop music. And Denise still writes and records. Listeners can find her if you Google her, Denise Marsa. And she did an awesome job on that recording.
And of course, after Lucky Stars, there were other hits as well. Songs like Ariel. Now, was that about a real person?
Well, Ariel was sort of an amalgam, a combination, a composite of all these teenage girls I grew up having a crush on when I was a teenager, living in the bosom of suburbia. And when I recorded this track, I was a little self-conscious because I thought, well, not much of a plot here. Not much happens in this story. They meet, they go out on a date, and they wind up kissing while the TV's signing off. But then I played the record for two teenage girls who lived on my block where I grew up in Paramus. And they listened to it, and they accused me of reading their diaries. And that's when it occurred to me that I might have written something that people might take a liking to.
Okay, well, taking you back to your teenage years now, was music something you were always destined to do?
Well, Robin, I grew up in a house filled with music. My mom was a singer and a performer on Broadway and in film. So there was always some Broadway show tune on the piano or some aria playing on the record player. And then, of course, I got my first transistor radio and started listening to all the top 40. So, it was the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan and the Supremes and Stevie Wonder. And so I just embraced all those disparate genres and musical idioms. And anyone familiar with my albums knows that they're eclectic. You're likely to hear, a little bit of country, jazz, folk, rock, pop, you name it. But for me, it's really about the story I'm telling. I think of what I do as writing short stories set to music. The story I'm telling, whatever music is called for to serve that story, is the direction I'll go in.
And do you remember the first song you ever wrote?
I do. I was 9 years old. I had just bought my first guitar with a bag of quarters that I earned delivering papers in Paramus, New Jersey. The first song was called I'd Love to Take a Swim with You in the Summertime.
Right.
I went, I'd love to take a swim with you in summertime. Oh yeah, we'd swim so far in the ocean so blue in the summertime. Of course, in those days, I sang it about an octave or two higher. I played it for my fourth grade teacher, played it for her brother, who was a lawyer in the music industry, played it for one of the publishers he worked with, a company called Elevator Music. They offered me a publishing contract. So at the tender age of 9, I signed my first publishing contract over milk and cookies. I practiced my signature for a week. About a month later, the company went bankrupt, right. Which foreshadowed how my career has gone ever since.
Now, tell me about the song McDonalds Girl, because that song was actually banned over here by the BBC.
Indeed. They were convinced immediately upon hearing that song. Millions of people all over the UK and Ireland would go rushing down to the nearest McDonald's and gorge themselves on hamburgers. Even though I argued that in the lyric, I never actually eat the hamburger. I always thought it could be more of a public service announcement, which did derail my career after I was dropped by my label and sent me off into the wilderness for a good number of years. But it was a little song that could. It insisted on being heard.
Yeah.
A short while later, a then unknown band out of Canada called Bare Naked Ladies did a cover version, which was their first airplay hit in Canada. And then a band called the Blenders had a #1 hit with McDonalds Girl in Norway. And then YouTube came along and it went viral. There are hundreds of videos of people all over the world, every continent, doing cover versions or lip syncing or acting out the scene to McDonalds Girl. So I've always been proud of that song. people ask what your favorite song is, and there's never a favorite. Songs are like kids. You love them all. It's just that some are better behaved than others. Some get you into trouble, but some, after a while, they even send home some money. 35 years.
And did you ever end up getting an endorsement with McDonald's?
Indeed. About 35 years after it was banned, I finally got a phone call from the McDonald's Corporation. They said, Mr. Friedman, we'd like to license your song for a national TV and radio campaign. I said, well, that's great. What took you so gosh darn long?
Yes.
So that's my retirement plan. I'm going to write a great hit song and then sit on my ass for 30 years, waiting for some giant commercial brand to recognize how good it is.
You mentioned the wilderness years as well. I mean, was there a time when you thought you were going to give up music and maybe do something else?
You know what? I never gave up music. I never stopped writing songs. I never stopped being a musician. But I did get very involved in a variety of other multimedia pursuits, really just because I've always had a passionate curiosity about all kinds of stuff. There was always some musical component to it. But I got involved. I wrote the first consumer guide for synthesizers, electronic keyboards. I designed the first virtual reality video game for national television for a game show called Nick Arcade and Total Panic on Nickelodeon TV. Wow. I created all these virtual reality game environments. Also for children's museums and science museums all over the world. So I had a great time exploring cutting edge technologies, all kinds of multimedia, designing musical playground exhibits for kids that have been enjoyed by millions of kids all over the world. But as I say, there was always some musical component to it. And of course, I never stopped writing songs. And it was in 2001 when I finally sent out that crowdfunding letter that I was able to continue pursuing independently what I've been doing, since I was a kid.
I've also written music for TV shows, and one show back in the 80s I used to love starred Michael Elphick. It was a little show called Boon, and you wrote the music for that.
I did. Jim Diamond wrote the great opening theme song, Hi Ho Silver. But after the first season, they invited me to do all the soundtrack music, all the incidental music for the show throughout the show, and also write songs for the end credits. Songs like He's My Friend, He's My Buddy. And I had a great time doing it. I got out my cowboy hat and I went to the studio. All that harmonica stuff that you hear, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 that's me playing harmonica in my home studio. And I flew over to Birmingham or Nottingham to record the rest of the tracks. And it was a great experience. I had a really fun time working with folks like Michael Elphick and Neil Morrissey. And that same cast and crew also went on to do an independent film, a low-budget horror film, a classic.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I bought a vampire motorcycle.
You got it, exactly. And they invited me to do the soundtrack for that as well, which was really great fun. The title track I wrote was She Runs on Blood, Not Gasoline. And it is a cinema classic. If you catch it late night on cable, definitely make sure to watch it. A trigger warning. It does have one of the most disgusting scenes in all of horror film cinema. You saw it.
And are you still exploring new music and listening to new stuff every day?
I do. And there's so much great music out there, and just only a small fraction of it ever gets to the mainstream airwaves or streaming outlets. And it's one of the reasons I've produced my micro music festival, Songfest, which I'm going to be presenting and hosting in Oxfordshire on Saturday, the 30th of July, where I invite some of my favorite singer-songwriters, folks like Booth B. Graffo and Fiona Bevan and Cal Lavelle and Ben Norris, Tracy Curtis, Charlotte Campbell, Latch, These are some of the best singer-songwriters out there. They don't always get the airplay they deserve or the recognition that they deserve, but they are the equal of some of the greatest songwriters that you could name. And I'm proud and delighted that they're going to be appearing at Songfest at the end of July. And so I know your listeners are mostly in Belfast, but if anyone finds themselves in Oxfordshire on Saturday the 3rd of July, do check us out. It's a great time. You find all that information, including my upcoming date at the Accidental Theatre in Belfast on Friday the 15th of July, on my website, which is deanfriedman.com.
Excellent. Well, Dean, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for doing this, and we look forward to seeing you back here in Belfast on the 15th of July at the Accidental Theatre.
Excellent. Robin, thanks for having me, and all my best to your listeners, and hope to see you and them down at the Accidental Theatre. Take care, man.
Thanks, Dean. Bye-bye. And that's all we have time for on the show this week. A big thank you to all of my guests. I'll see you back here same time next week. Bye-bye.
Don't you fret now, don't you cry. It's an American lullaby. Manifest destiny's a lie. It's an American lullaby. Half moon sailing through the night. Crack of a musket fired, first light. Always keep your powder dry. It's an American lullaby. Rest your head in dreams, you'll fly. It's an American lullaby. Blaze a trail across the sky. It's an American lullaby. Drinking gourd will point the way. Stealth by night and sleep by day. Beg like Joe, you can rely. It's an American lullaby. Unclench your fist and dry your eye.